Alien girl begged for help, but the human she turned to didn't realize she was a billionaire's daughter. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's return to our main character. David never imagined that his quiet life would be interrupted by anything other than the usual routine of working as a low-level security guard in a quiet, unimpressive building. But all of that changed one fateful evening when a woman, or more accurately, an alien woman, stumbled into his life. She wasn't just any alien. She was tall, with skin that shimmered in hues of violet, and eyes that gleamed with a mixture of fear and determination. Her name was Elara. She had nowhere else to turn. Elara had been running, escaping from pursuers she'd rather not face. They wanted something from her, something that, if they got it, would seal her fate forever. But David didn't know any of this. He didn't know that the beautiful, desperate woman standing before him was a daughter of one of the wealthiest, most powerful families in the galaxy. Elara had nothing left, no one to turn to. All she had was a single plea for help. She didn't know who else to trust. With nowhere to run, she approached David, her heart pounding, desperate for protection. "Please," she said, her voice shaky, "I need your help." David, though surprised by her sudden appearance and the frantic look in her eyes, did what any decent human being would do. He helped her. He didn't hesitate, didn't question her. He simply led her inside the security office, locked the door, and began to calm her down. He gave her water, offered her shelter. She looked nothing like the typical troublemakers he dealt with in his daily life. As the minutes passed, Elara began to open up, telling him fragments of her story. But there was something she didn't say, something she couldn't. She couldn't reveal who she really was, not yet. David, for his part, was just trying to figure out what was going on. He didn't think twice about offering her shelter, even though he was sure that helping her would only complicate his life. What he didn't know was that this simple act of kindness would alter the course of both their lives in ways he couldn't begin to imagine. Elara watched him with cautious eyes, still unsure of his intentions. But something in David's calm demeanor, his willingness to help without asking for anything in return, made her believe that perhaps there was hope left in this galaxy after all. Little did David know that the woman he had just helped would turn out to be the daughter of an intergalactic billionaire with connections that could change his life forever. As the night wore on, David couldn't shake the feeling that he'd just made a choice that would lead him into a world far more complicated and far more dangerous than anything he had ever known. He had no idea what secrets Elara was hiding or the incredible twists of fate that were about to unfold. But one thing was clear: life as he knew it would never be the same again. As the night wore on, David couldn't help but feel a growing sense of unease. The silence in the small security office was almost oppressive, broken only by the hum of the building's systems. Elara had finally settled down, her earlier panic fading into exhaustion. She sat quietly, her violet eyes fixed on the floor, lost in thought. David glanced at her, still unsure of how to proceed. He had always prided himself on being a good person, but this felt different. He didn't know what kind of trouble she was in, or why she had come to him of all people. But he couldn't just turn her away. She needed help, and for whatever reason, he felt like he was the one meant to give it to her. Elara suddenly looked up, meeting his gaze. Her voice was softer now, more controlled. "I'm sorry for causing you trouble," she said, her words laced with a subtle sadness. "You didn't have to help me." David shook his head. "It's no trouble. You're safe here. But I need to know what's going on. Who are you running from, Elara? What's this all about?" Elara hesitated, her fingers nervously tracing the edge of the table. She had been avoiding answering his questions, but David could tell that she was on the verge of revealing something important. "I don't want to drag you into this," she said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. "But I have no choice. I can't keep running. They'll find me sooner or later." David leaned forward, his curiosity piqued. "Who will find you? And why do they want you?" Elara closed her eyes, taking a deep breath as if to gather the strength to tell him the truth. "My family is very powerful. We control a vast fortune, spanning many systems in this galaxy. I am the daughter of the Dominion's ruling family. But my father's enemies are after me. They want to take everything he built, and they'll use me to do it. David's eyes widened in shock. He had no idea that this seemingly fragile alien woman was part of such an influential family. It was hard to believe. He had assumed she was just another lost soul, someone in need of a quick escape from whatever danger lurked outside. But now, as the pieces started to fall into place, David realized that Elara was far more important than he could have imagined. So, you're saying, you're a princess? He asked, still processing what she had just revealed. Elara nodded, her expression distant. I didn't want this life. I didn't choose to be born into it. But it's my reality now, and it's a dangerous one. My father's enemies won't stop until they have control of everything, and I'm their leverage. David sat back in his chair, absorbing the gravity of her words. He had never been involved in anything like this before. But somehow, in this moment, he realized that his life was about to change forever. So what now? He asked, his voice steady. What do we do? Elara looked at him, her eyes filled with a mixture of gratitude and uncertainty. I don't know. I can't stay here for long. I'm putting you in danger just by being here. David shook his head. You're not putting me in danger. You're safe here. I won't let anyone hurt you. He said the words without thinking, his protective instinct kicking in. Elara gave him a faint smile, but it was clear that she didn't fully believe him. Thank you, she whispered. But I don't think you understand how deep this goes. These people, they don't just want me. They want everything my family has. And they will stop at nothing to get it. David felt the weight of her words sink in. He was just a regular guy, a security guard with no connections to anyone important. He had no idea what he was getting into, but one thing was clear. He couldn't turn his back on her now. He had made a promise, and he would keep it. He would protect her, no matter the cost. As the night dragged on, David couldn't shake the feeling that he was now part of something much bigger than himself. He had always lived a quiet, uneventful life, but that was about to change. He didn't know how he was going to keep Elara safe, but he knew one thing for sure. He wasn't going to let her go. She wasn't just some alien girl who needed help. She was someone who had the power to change everything, and somehow, in this strange twist of fate, he was the one who was going to be there for her. David couldn't shake the feeling that things were spiraling out of control. The next few days passed in a blur of unease and careful decisions. Elara remained hidden, staying in the small security office where David worked. And though the building was relatively quiet, the weight of what was happening outside seemed to grow heavier with every passing hour. David did what he could to keep her safe. He installed extra locks, set up a few security cameras, and even went so far as to reroute the building's communication lines, just in case someone tried to trace her. But despite his best efforts, he knew it wouldn't be long before the people after her would find her. The tension between them was palpable. Elara had kept her distance, and David respected that. She was clearly torn between the relief of being hidden and the burden of knowing that no matter where she went, the threats would follow. He had tried to engage her in conversation, to learn more about the galaxy she came from, the people who sought her, but she would only speak in short, guarded sentences. For the first time in his life, David felt out of his depth. He was just a regular guy, nothing special, nothing extraordinary. Yet here he was, involved in a situation so far beyond anything he could have imagined. The weight of Elara's trust felt heavy on his shoulders, but he couldn't turn back now. He had made a promise. That evening, after a long day of security checks and endless strategizing, David sat down across from Elara in the small office, exhausted but resolute. You need to tell me what's really going on, he said, his voice firm but gentle. I can't keep protecting you if I don't know what I'm dealing with. Elara looked up at him, her eyes tired and wary. She hesitated for a long moment, as if weighing whether or not to finally open up. Her hand rested on the table, her fingers nervously tapping the surface. I didn't want to drag you into this, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. But it's too late now. You deserve to know. She took a deep breath and began. I'm from a family that controls most of the wealth in the Dominion. My father, Lord Valanis, was the head of the Dominion's financial network. He built everything, the power, the influence, the wealth. And now, they want it all. My father's enemies have been after me for years, but after his death, they saw an opportunity to take everything. David's mind raced as he tried to process the gravity of her words. So they're using you as leverage? He asked, his voice low. Elara nodded. Exactly. I'm the last surviving member of my family with the knowledge to maintain what he built. If they control me, they control everything. The worst part is, they've already made deals with some of the most powerful factions in the galaxy. I'm nothing more than a pawn to them. David felt a chill run down his spine as he realized just how dangerous her enemies were. This wasn't just some local dispute. This was about galactic power. And you think they'll come after you here? He asked. Elara met his gaze, her eyes full of fear and determination. They already are. They know I'm here. They've been tracking my every move, even before I came to Earth. I thought I could hide, but I was wrong. They have resources, connections, everything. They'll stop at nothing to get what they want. David felt his heart race. He knew that he couldn't just hide her away forever. If they really were after her, no place would be safe. He was in over his head, but he couldn't turn away now. Not when she had trusted him with the truth. What do we do now? David asked, his voice steady despite the uncertainty gnawing at him. Elara stood up, her hands trembling slightly as she walked to the window. We fight, she said, her voice firm. I can't keep running. If I'm going to survive, I need to take back control. I need to find out who's behind all of this and stop them. David's eyes widened. You want me to help you fight them? Elara turned to him, her face a mask of determination. I need someone I can trust. Someone who's not afraid to stand up to them. David thought for a moment. He had no idea what kind of enemies they were dealing with, but he knew that Elara had no one else. I'll help you, he said, his voice resolute. But we need a plan, and we need to get you somewhere safe, somewhere they won't be able to find us. Elara nodded, a faint smile touching her lips. I'll do whatever it takes. I'm not running anymore. As David watched her, he realized that he had no idea what he was getting himself into. This was no longer just about protecting a stranger. It was about helping her take on an entire empire. And no matter what happened, he couldn't back down now. They were in this together, for better or for worse. David sat in silence, his mind racing as he thought about the gravity of Elara's situation. The weight of her words had settled over him like a heavy blanket. But there was no turning back now. He had already committed to helping her, and now they had to figure out their next move. The calm that had filled the room earlier had vanished, replaced by an undeniable tension. Elara stood by the window, her gaze distant as she contemplated their options. We need to act fast, she said, breaking the silence. My enemies are resourceful. They won't stop until they have what they want, and they won't care who gets hurt in the process. David nodded, his mind working through the details. Okay, so we need a plan. First, we need to figure out who they are and what they're after. We also need to make sure you're not a target anymore. Elara turned to face him, her violet eyes locking onto his with a new sense of determination. We don't have time for a slow approach, she replied. I've been running for too long. I want to take the fight to them before they do it to me. David took a deep breath, trying to steady his nerves. So what's the next step? How do we fight back? Elara hesitated for a moment, as if weighing her words. I know someone who can help. Someone who has the resources and the knowledge to take down my enemies. But it's going to require trust. And it's going to be dangerous. David felt a knot form in his stomach. Who is this person? Elara didn't answer right away. Instead, she walked over to a small table in the corner of the room and retrieved a sleek, silver device. She handed it to David. This is a secure communicator, she explained. It's linked to an old contact of mine, someone I trust. He can get us the information we need. David examined the device closely. It looked advanced, unlike anything he had seen before, but he didn't question it. And what do we do after we contact him? Elara's expression hardened. We go after them. We strike before they can strike at us. It's the only way I can guarantee we stay one step ahead. David looked at her, trying to read her. She had always seemed calm, composed even in the most tense moments. But there was something about her now, something fierce, almost desperate, that made him realize the true depth of the situation. Okay, he said finally. Let's do it. We'll contact your guy, and then we figure out how to take them down. Elara gave him a tight nod. I knew I could count on you. She turned away, dialing the device, her fingers moving with swift precision. David watched her, his thoughts scattered. He had never imagined his life would come to this. He was just a regular guy, with a regular job. But now he was involved in something far bigger than he could have ever dreamed. The implications of what they were about to do, going up against an entire network of enemies, powerful and dangerous, were massive. And yet, there was no turning back. The weight of responsibility pressed down on him. But there was a sense of resolve in him now. He couldn't abandon her. He wouldn't. "It's done," Elara said, her voice steady. She turned to face him again. "We're meeting him tomorrow. He'll have everything we need to move forward." David nodded, his heart pounding in his chest. "Tomorrow, then. What's our plan after that?" Elara walked over to him and placed a hand on his shoulder. "After tomorrow, we take the fight to them. We make them regret ever coming after me." There was no hesitation in her voice, no doubt. Just a fierce determination that made David believe they could actually win this fight. As Elara made preparations for their meeting, David found himself staring out the window, his mind still processing everything. He had no idea what tomorrow would bring, or what kind of enemies they would be facing. But one thing was certain. This was no longer just about helping an alien woman in need. This was about something much bigger, fighting for survival in a dangerous, high-stakes game of power, and doing it together. The time for hiding was over. They were about to go on the offensive, and David was ready for whatever came next. The next day arrived with a sense of urgency that neither David nor Elara could ignore. The meeting was set for noon, and everything felt like it was on the line. David had no idea who Elara's contact was, but he knew that this was their chance to turn the tide. The weight of the decision to fight back against her enemies sat heavily on their shoulders. David had spent the morning going over the building's security systems once more, double-checking the locks, and ensuring everything was as secure as possible. But despite all the preparation, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to go wrong. Elara, on the other hand, seemed oddly calm. She had always been composed, but today, there was something different about her. She was focused, driven, and her eyes burned with determination. It was as if she had already accepted the dangers ahead, and she wasn't backing down. They met in the small office once again, Elara standing by the door with the communicator in her hand. "We're ready," she said simply. David gave her a reassuring nod, though his heart was pounding in his chest. "Let's get this over with," he replied. Elara pressed a few buttons on the device, and after a moment, a holographic projection flickered to life in front of them. The figure that appeared was a tall man with sharp features and dark, penetrating eyes. He was dressed in a sleek black suit, the kind of attire that screamed authority. "Elara." The man's voice was calm but firm. "It's been a long time." Elara's face softened slightly, though there was no warmth in her smile. "Yes, it has, Kalen," she replied. David stood beside her, feeling out of place in the midst of their exchange. He had no idea who Kalen was, but the way Elara addressed him suggested that he was someone significant, someone who could help. "This is the man I told you about," Elara continued, her voice steady. "David." Kalen's gaze shifted toward David, his eyes scanning him with a sharpness that made David uncomfortable. "So, you're the one who's been hiding her." David straightened, trying to meet Kalen's gaze without showing any signs of nervousness. "I'm just doing what I can to help," he said, keeping his voice neutral. Kalen nodded slowly, his eyes never leaving David. "Good. Because what comes next will require more than just hiding." He paused, as if weighing his words carefully. "You're involved now, whether you like it or not. You've made yourself a target by helping her." David didn't flinch at Kalen's words, but inside, his heart raced. He knew this was dangerous, knew that stepping into Elara's world meant putting himself at risk. But he had already made his choice, and there was no turning back. "What do we do next?" David asked, keeping his tone steady. Kalen's eyes narrowed, and for a moment, there was a flicker of something in his gaze, something that told David this wasn't going to be easy. "First, we need to find out exactly who we're dealing with. I've been gathering intel on Elara's enemies, but it's fragmented. We need more precise information. There's a network of powerful individuals behind this, and they've infiltrated several high-level organizations. They won't stop until they have control." David nodded, absorbing the gravity of Kalen's words. This wasn't just some rogue group looking to take over a few assets. They were facing an organized, highly capable force. "How do we find them?" Elara asked, her voice low but fierce. Kalen's gaze flicked to her. "We have a few leads. One of their key players, a man named Zarek, has been spotted in the vicinity. We need to get close to him and extract the information we need. Elara's face hardened, and David could see the resolve in her eyes. I know where he's hiding. We can get to him. Kalen raised an eyebrow, clearly impressed. Then it settled. We move tonight. David's pulse quickened at the thought of going up against these powerful enemies so soon, but he knew they didn't have a choice. The clock was ticking, and they had to act fast. I'll get my things, Elara said, turning toward the door. David followed her, his mind racing with questions. But there was no time to think. The plan was set, and they had to stick to it. That evening, they made their way to the designated location, a warehouse on the outskirts of town. The shadows seemed to grow longer as they approached, and David couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. They slipped into the building through a side entrance, Elara leading the way. The place was dimly lit, filled with the sounds of distant machinery humming. As they moved deeper into the warehouse, David's instincts were on high alert. He knew that danger could be lurking around any corner. Elara paused, her eyes scanning the room. He's here, she whispered. Stay close. David nodded, his hand resting on the sidearm he had taken with him. They continued through the maze of crates and containers, each step taking them closer to their target. It wasn't long before they spotted him, Zarek, standing with a small group of men near the back of the warehouse. Elara's hand tightened around the communicator, ready to relay the signal. David's heart pounded in his chest as they moved into position, but he kept his focus. This was it. They were finally going to take the fight to the people who had been hunting her. And they weren't going down without a fight. The tension in the air was thick as David and Elara moved through the dark warehouse. Their footsteps were barely audible against the cold, concrete floor, but every shadow seemed to carry the weight of danger. Zarek and his men were just ahead, their conversation low and conspiratorial. Elara motioned for David to stay behind a large stack of crates, her eyes scanning the room. David's heart was racing, and his hand tightened on his weapon. He wasn't trained for this kind of operation, but he knew he couldn't back down now, not after everything that had happened. Elara leaned in closer, her breath soft against his ear. We need to take him alive, she whispered. He's the key to everything. If we can get the information out of him, we can end this. David nodded, trying to steady his breathing. How do we do this? Elara's gaze flicked to the group of men, each of them armed and on edge. I'll distract them. You grab Zarek. David's mind raced. He had no idea how Elara planned to distract them, but he trusted her. She had proven time and again that she was resourceful, capable. All right, he said, his voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through his veins. Let's do it. Elara stepped out from behind the crates, moving swiftly and silently toward the center of the warehouse. She didn't draw attention to herself, but her presence seemed to command the room as she approached the group. Zarek turned, his sharp eyes locking onto her. For a moment, there was a brief exchange of recognition, but Elara was already in motion. She pulled out a small device from her belt, pressing a button that sent a burst of bright light and noise into the air. The men were caught off guard, their weapons drawn and eyes darting around in confusion. In the chaos, Elara moved quickly, her eyes locking onto Zarek as she lunged toward him, knocking him off balance. David didn't hesitate. He sprinted forward, using the cover of the confusion to reach Zarek's side. The men had barely regained their composure when David grabbed Zarek by the arm, yanking him into the corner of the warehouse. Zarek struggled, his eyes wide with fury, but David was too quick, pinning him against the wall with a firm grip. You're not going anywhere, David said, his voice low and commanding. Zarek's lips curled into a sneer, his eyes filled with venom. You don't know what you're dealing with, he spat, struggling to break free. You think you can stop us? You're just a pawn. David's grip tightened. Maybe, he said, but I'm the one holding the cards now. Elara joined them, moving quickly to stand beside David. She gave Zarek a cold, calculating look. Where is he? She demanded. Zarek laughed, a harsh, mocking sound. You think I'll just tell you? You're wasting your time. Elara's expression hardened, her voice lowering to a dangerous level. I don't have time for games. Tell me where he is, or I'll make you wish you had never crossed me. Zarek's expression faltered for just a moment, and in that moment, Elara saw the flicker of fear in his eyes. He knew she wasn't bluffing. You'll never find him, he muttered. He's too well protected. You're out of your league. Elara took a step forward, her face inches from his. "Where is he?" "Zarek," she repeated, her voice ice cold. Zarek hesitated, his eyes darting between her and David. The warehouse was eerily quiet now, the only sound the distant hum of machinery. It felt like the calm before a storm. Finally, Zarek's shoulders slumped, his resistance fading. "Fine," he said, his voice dripping with contempt. "He's hiding on the outskirts of the city, at an old military base. But you won't make it there. We'll be waiting for you." David's heart raced as he processed the information. A military base. It made sense. If Zarek's enemies were as powerful as Elara said, that was exactly the kind of place they would hide. "Thank you for the help," Elara said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. She turned to David. "We've got what we need. Let's go." David didn't waste another second. He grabbed Elara's arm, pulling her toward the exit. They had no time to waste. The military base was their next target, and Zarek had just given them the key to finding it. As they moved through the warehouse, David couldn't shake the feeling that they were walking into a trap. But he couldn't let that stop him. Not now. Not when they were this close to ending it. They reached the exit, but as they stepped into the cold night air, a feeling of dread washed over David. This wasn't over. Far from it. He could sense that they were being watched. And whatever lay ahead, he knew it would be the most dangerous thing they had ever faced. But they couldn't stop now. They had come too far. And for Elara, he would face whatever came next. David and Elara moved swiftly through the dark streets, their footsteps barely audible against the concrete. The city was eerily quiet, save for the distant hum of traffic and the occasional flicker of a street lamp. David couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching them, something lurking just beyond the edge of his perception. He glanced at Elara, whose face was set in a hard, determined expression. She was focused, her eyes scanning the shadows as they walked. She had always been the one in control, but tonight, there was an edge to her that made David uneasy. She was determined to end this, to stop the people who had been hunting her and her family. David had no doubt that they would stop at nothing to get what they wanted. He knew they were walking into a trap, but he also knew that they couldn't turn back now. Elara had been running for far too long, and if they didn't act now, she might never be free. "We're almost there," Elara said, breaking the silence. Her voice was steady, but David could hear the tension underneath. "I hope Zarek was telling the truth," he replied, his voice low. "I'm not sure we can trust him." Elara's gaze hardened. "He gave us the location. That's all we need." They reached a quiet alleyway, and Elara paused, looking around carefully. "Stay close," she whispered, moving swiftly toward a small, unmarked door at the end of the alley. David followed, his hand resting on the sidearm at his hip. He didn't know what awaited them inside, but he was ready for anything. Elara slid the door open, and they stepped into a dimly lit corridor. The air smelled stale, and the walls were covered in rust and grime. It felt like they had entered a different world, one that had been abandoned for years. "This is it," Elara said, her voice barely a whisper. "The entrance to the base is through here." David nodded, his senses heightened. He could feel the weight of the situation pressing down on him. They had come this far, and there was no turning back now. As they moved through the narrow hallway, Elara stopped suddenly, holding up a hand to signal him to be quiet. David froze, his heart racing. He could hear footsteps echoing from the other end of the hall, faint but unmistakable. "We're not alone," Elara whispered, her voice tense. David's mind raced. He had no idea how many people were in this base, or how well guarded it was. But they couldn't afford to be caught. "What now?" he asked, his voice barely audible. Elara's eyes flicked to the side, her mind working quickly. "We need to move. Get to the control room. We'll find the information we need there." They continued down the corridor, careful not to make a sound. The footsteps grew louder, and David felt a surge of adrenaline course through his veins. He wasn't sure if they were being followed or if they were just close to another guard, but either way, they had to keep moving. As they rounded a corner, they came face to face with a group of armed guards. David's heart stopped for a moment, but Elara was already in motion. She moved faster than he could react, darting toward the guards and taking them by surprise. David watched in awe as she disarmed one of the guards, using his own momentum against him. She was a blur of motion, her movements precise and fluid. Within seconds, the guards were down, unconscious on the floor. Elara turned to David, her face calm, but her eyes sharp. "We don't have much time. she said, her voice steady. We need to get to the control room, now. They continued through the base, moving swiftly and silently, Elara leading the way with confidence. They passed through several rooms, each one more heavily guarded than the last, but Elara always seemed to know where to go. It was like she had been here before, or at least knew the layout of the base intimately. Finally, they reached a large steel door with a high-tech lock. Elara quickly pulled out a small device from her belt, connecting it to the door's control panel. There was a brief moment of silence before the door clicked open, revealing the control room beyond. Inside, rows of monitors and high-tech equipment filled the room, and in the center of it all sat a large console. Elara moved quickly, her fingers flying across the controls as she accessed the information they needed. David stood guard, his heart racing as he scanned the room. He could feel the tension building, knowing that every second they spent here increased the risk of being caught. Elara's voice broke through the silence. I've got it, she said, her voice tight with urgency. I know who's behind all of this. David turned to her, his mind racing with questions. Who? Elara didn't answer right away. Instead, she looked at the screen, her expression grim. It's not just Zarek, she said finally. The people behind this, they're far more powerful than we thought. They've infiltrated several key organizations. This isn't just about me anymore. This is about a war for control of the entire sector. David felt a chill run down his spine as the full weight of the situation hit him. They weren't just fighting for Elara's survival anymore. They were fighting for the future of an entire galaxy, and the stakes had never been higher. As Elara looked at the screen, the information began to sink in. David stood behind her, his heart pounding, trying to process what she had just said. This was bigger than either of them had imagined. The people behind the plot to capture her were part of a larger conspiracy, a network of power-hungry individuals who were working together to control the galaxy's most valuable assets. Elara's voice broke through his thoughts, her tone colder now, more focused. This is far from over, she said, her eyes scanning the details on the screen. They've been using me as a pawn to get what they want, but now we know who's pulling the strings. David leaned over, his eyes following the list of names and organizations on the screen. He couldn't believe what he was seeing. So what now? He asked, his voice tight with uncertainty. Elara looked up at him, her expression steely. We need to hit them where it hurts. We go after their assets, their supply chains. We disrupt their operations and take away their power. If we can do that, we can force them to reveal themselves. David nodded, the weight of the plan settling over him. He had never been part of something like this before, and it felt like they were walking into the heart of danger. But there was no turning back now. Elara had made it clear. They were in this together, and they couldn't afford to fail. How do we find their assets? David asked, trying to keep his mind focused. Elara's fingers flew over the console, pulling up more files. We have contacts, she said, her voice calm but with a hint of urgency. I'll reach out to them, see if we can track down their next move. David watched her work, his thoughts swirling. This wasn't just about protecting Elara anymore. It was about stopping a conspiracy that could change everything. The lives of countless people were at stake, and they were the only ones who knew the truth. Elara's expression softened for a moment as she looked at David. Thank you, she said quietly. I couldn't have gotten this far without you. David gave her a tight-lipped smile, trying to hide the fear and uncertainty he felt. We're not done yet, he replied, his voice steady despite the storm brewing inside him. The plan was in motion, and there was no time to waste. Elara stood, moving to a small locker where she pulled out a small, unassuming device. This is our next step, she said, holding it up for David to see. It was a small, portable data transfer unit. Nothing extraordinary at first glance, but David knew that this device would be crucial in their next phase. We're going to infiltrate one of their facilities, Elara explained, her voice low but determined. This device will allow us to hack into their systems and gather more intel. It's our best shot at exposing them for good. David felt a chill run down his spine. They were about to take a dangerous step into enemy territory, and there was no guarantee they would make it out unscathed. But Elara had made it clear, they were already too deep to back out now. Where is this facility? David asked, his mind racing with the possibilities. Not far, Elara said, her eyes narrowing as she studied the map on the screen. It's a secure location, but we've got the element of surprise on our side. We're not going in guns blazing. We need to be smart about this. David nodded, feeling the weight of the mission settle on his shoulders. He wasn't sure if he was ready for what was coming, but he knew one thing for sure. He wasn't going to let Elara down. They had come this far, and now it was time to finish what they started. As they gathered their gear and prepared to leave, David couldn't help but wonder how far they would have to go to stop the people behind the conspiracy. They were taking on a powerful enemy, one that had resources, influence, and control. But they had one thing the enemy didn't: each other. David and Elara were a team now, and nothing was going to tear them apart. As they stepped out into the night, David's mind was clear. They had a mission to complete, and they were going to see it through, no matter the cost. The night was their cover as David and Elara approached the facility. The concrete walls loomed in the distance, surrounded by barbed wire and security systems that seemed impenetrable. But for them, this was the moment. They had come too far to back down now. David adjusted the straps on his gear, his heart pounding in his chest. He wasn't a soldier. He wasn't a spy. But for Elara, he had become something more. They were a team now, and together, they had to finish this. Elara led the way, moving like a shadow through the darkness. Her calm confidence gave David a sense of purpose, a reminder that they were not just fighting for survival. They were fighting for a future that had been stolen from her and her family. The device she had given him earlier was tucked securely in his jacket, ready to be used to hack into the facility's mainframe. They had to move fast. This was a high-security location, and they had no idea how long they had before reinforcements arrived. Elara's eyes darted to the entrance, scanning for any sign of movement. "We'll use the maintenance tunnel," she whispered, pointing to a small access door on the side of the building. "It's the only way in without triggering their alarms." David nodded, following her every move. They approached the door with caution, but Elara already had the lock picked. With a soft click, the door swung open, and they slipped inside. The tunnel was narrow and dimly lit, the air stale with the scent of metal and dust. David's footsteps echoed in the silence, but he remained focused, his hand never leaving the grip of his weapon. "Stay quiet," Elara whispered, her voice barely audible. "We're close." They moved deeper into the facility, weaving through corridors and avoiding patrols. It felt like they were walking on a knife's edge, each step bringing them closer to their goal. But with every corner turned, the danger grew. Finally, they reached the control room. The door was locked, but Elara was already at work, pulling out a small hacking tool. David kept watch, his senses on high alert. They couldn't afford any mistakes now. As Elara worked, David's mind raced. They had come to destroy the heart of the operation, but what if they couldn't? What if they weren't strong enough? But he pushed the thoughts aside. He had to believe they could do this. For Elara, for the people who depended on them. With a final click, the door unlocked, and Elara motioned for David to follow. They stepped inside, and there it was, the control center of everything. Monitors blinked with data, and rows of high-tech equipment hummed quietly in the background. But in the middle of it all sat a terminal. Elara moved quickly, her fingers flying across the keyboard. She was in. "We've got access," she said, her voice steady but with a hint of excitement. "Give me a minute to pull the data." David scanned the room, his nerves on edge. He could feel the weight of time pressing down on them. They didn't have much longer before the alarms went off, and when that happened, there would be no escaping. But Elara's focus was unwavering. She was determined, and for the first time in a long time, David felt a sense of hope. They could do this. They could end this. The data began to flow onto the screen, revealing names, locations, and plans. Everything they needed to expose the conspiracy. But just as Elara was about to finish, the door slammed open. The guards had found them. "Go!" Elara shouted, pushing the device into David's hands. "Get out of here." David didn't hesitate. He grabbed her hand, pulling her toward the back exit. They had to move quickly. The guards were closing in. With every step, David's heart pounded louder in his chest, but he didn't look back. They reached the rear exit just as the first wave of security arrived. David shoved the door open, and they both sprinted into the night. The cool air hit them like a wave, but there was no time to catch their breath. They ran through the darkened streets, not daring to stop until they were far enough away. As they reached the safe house, David turned to Elara, his breath coming in ragged gasps. "We made it," he said, a shaky laugh escaping his lips. Elara looked at him, her eyes filled with both exhaustion and gratitude. We did, she agreed. But this isn't over yet. We've got the information we need, but now we need to take it to the people who can stop them. David nodded, understanding the weight of what came next. The battle wasn't won yet. They still had to expose the conspiracy to the rest of the galaxy. But for the first time, David believed they could win. Together, they could bring down the people who had been hunting her and her family for so long. And he would be there with her every step of the way.